believe me, Jarvis wants to shoot. He's on a roll. He'd love to be able to do something with this ball. He may be banking this ball. Yes, he is. What a shot. What a shot.
Its history is ancient. Its action is infinite. Whether you prefer 8-ball, 9-ball, rotation, or straight pool, one rule never changes. The more you know, the more fun it is to play. And few people know more about the game than Bob Byrne. He's a winner of major tournaments, a nationally recognized writer and columnist, and a master teacher of the infinitely exciting game of pool. His 2 books on the subject are considered by experts to be the finest of their kind ever written. Byrne's Standard Book of Pool and Billiards, and Byrne's Treasury of Trick Shots in Pool and Billiards. And he is also the star of the most highly praised instructional pool video ever released, Byrne's Standard Video of Pool and Billiards, Volume 1. Now, in Volume 2, Bob Byrne opens up a new world of pool knowledge for those who have mastered the skills explained in Volume 1. And now, here's the expert, Bob Byrne.
Welcome to Tape 2 of How to Become a Really Devastating Pool Player. I'm Bob Byrne, and in the next few minutes, I'm going to teach you how to reach the next plateau of pool proficiency, where we get into things like masse and swerve and jump and combining English. In the first tape, we covered the fundamentals: stance, grip, bridge, stroke, aim, and those have to be mastered if you want to be a good player. If they are mastered, most shots become quite easy. There are certain things you should be able to do before you get into this tape, because I want to push you to an even higher plateau than you are on already. Set up an easy shot like this, a draw shot. If you can make the 11 and draw back to the 3, that means you're past the beginner class. Another shot you should be able to make reliably is this one, a long follow. Make the 9 in the corner and follow the cue ball the length of the table for position on the 7. If you can make shots like that reliably, say 4 out of 5 times, then maybe you're ready for Tape 2. It'd be foolish to watch Tape 2 without having mastered those fundamentals, and if you tried to do that, well, you're probably crazy, and your loved one should dial 911.
The segments that follow will be divided into 2 parts. In the first part, the theory behind the shots will be explained at the demonstration board. Then, in the second part, called practice, the camera will move to the table, where the shots will actually be made. Throughout the tape, a solid yellow line will be used to indicate the path of the cue ball. A dotted pink line will be used to indicate the path of the object ball. When it is necessary to show how the cue ball is spinning, a striped cue ball will be substituted for the familiar all-white one.
It's a tough shot. He doesn't want to miss it. Good shot. Good shot. Here we go.
Here's an example where you might want to combine follow with side spin. A game of 8-ball. You have to make the 9, get position on the 8. You could do it in this simplified example by just using follow. The 9 goes in the side, the follow carries the cue ball to here and out for the 8. However, you might have a problem. There might be a ball blocking the path you want the cue ball to take. No sweat. You could easily get around that by combining follow with a little side spin. Look at this player's eye view of a cue ball. That's the table, and that's how the face of the cue ball appears to the player. If you use high right, that is, you're above center, you're to the right of the vertical axis, you now have some side spin as well as follow. And when you make the 9, the cue ball will hit here, and the side spin will change the rebound angle to miss the interference and come down for the 8. Let's try a different example. Let's say the 9 is here, the cue ball is here, and the 8 is way down at the other end of the table. If you use just follow, you might end up in the side pocket. It'll follow through to here, to here, to here, maybe go in, or the angle will be so sharp it'll come off in this direction and leave you with nothing. But if you use a little left-hand English as well as follow, you could avoid that problem. There's high left, 11 o'clock if that were a clock face. Now when you make the 9, the cue ball will follow through as before because you're hitting it above center to here, but the side spin will change this angle completely, avoid the side, and get you down for a perfect position on the 8. There are thousands of examples like that. It's up to you to be aware of the utility of combining topspin with side spin and apply it to the positions that you find in your own games. Now when a cue ball hits an object ball full, the first thing it does is stop dead. Then what happens next depends on whether it has any topspin or backspin on it. A natural forward roll will cause the cue ball to follow forward after it hits the object ball. But if you're using any speed, there might not be enough distance for the friction of the cloth to give the cue ball natural forward roll. Then you have to hit it above center to make sure it has topspin. In applying topspin, you must have a level cue. You must hit it above center, and you do that not by raising the heel of your hand off the cloth, which makes your bridge unsteady. Just raise your fingers up so that you can hit it above center. Beyond 7/10 of the diameter is not too helpful. So just hit it roughly halfway from the midpoint to the top. Now here's a position where I'm going to make the 9 ball and try to get position on an 8 ball down at the other end. If I just use topspin, the angle off the rail is roughly like this. That's pretty good position. But what if we have the same shot with an interfering ball? Now, if the cue ball followed the same path, it might hit that ball and ruin your shape or position. We can get around that problem with a little bit of side spin as well as the top spin. Now remember, the side spin doesn't influence the angle off that first ball, only the angle off the rail. High and low on the vertical axis changes that, but not side spin. Now watch this. When I use a little side spin as well as follow, the angle off the first rail will be much different. You miss the interference and still get good position on the 8. I want to show you one more example. Let's say the 8 is all the way down at the other end of the table. And we have a shot almost straight into the corner. The problem here is to make the 5 and get position on the 8. If I just use follow, the angles wouldn't be very helpful. I would go here and here, possibly scratching the side or come out too much in the center of the table. It would look like this. Very poor position. The other man would probably win the game. But if I use a little side spin as well as the top spin, the problem is solved. The angle off the second rail would be much different. Watch. Much different angle down the table. You've got good position on the 8. And if you do that well every time, you'll probably lose a customer. Draw is a little harder to control and follow, so there aren't as many opportunities for combining draw with side spin. But opportunities do arise. Let's take this position. We've got an 11 straight in. We have an 8 down here at the end of the table. If I just use straight draw on this shot, the angle will be roughly like this, and I may not have good position. Now what I love about watching shots like this on tape is you can see the way the ball stops before it comes back. Now I'm in deep trouble. But if I had combined a little side spin with that draw, it would be the other player who's in deep trouble. Now watch how the rebound angle changes off this rail because of the side spin. That keeps you in the game. If you combine stop with side spin on a straight-in shot, you leave the cue ball spinning like a top. Well, why would you ever want to do that? Well, some players think that if you have a slight cut on the ball and you want to minimize drift to one side, it's best to use that stop action with spin to throw the object ball offline into the pocket. But I think that's a little risky, and I would prefer shooting softly in that situation. A more useful application of stop with side spin is on a bank shot. You can transfer a little bit of that furious spin from the cue ball to the object ball and change the rebound angle slightly. You might have an interfering ball here, which prevents you from hitting the 3-ball in the correct spot. Or there might be an interfering ball on the rail that prevents you from hitting the spot you think is necessary. What you would have to do then is to use heavy spin on the cue ball, transfer a little bit of it to the object ball, and influence the angle of the bank. It's not easy, but it helps you get out of a tough spot in many cases.
Side spin may be combined with follow or draw to alter the angle at which the cue ball rebounds off the rail. Remember, side spin does not influence the angle at which the cue ball rebounds off the object ball. When banking an object ball, heavy side spin on the cue ball can be used to alter the angle at which the object ball rebounds off the rail.
So far, we've limited ourselves to straight-in shots. Now let's see what happens to the object ball and the cue ball when the shot is at an angle, a cut shot. Here's a simple cut shot. When the cue ball reaches the object ball on a cut shot into this pocket, the 3-ball will travel along the line of centers at the moment of contact, except for the throw effect. Because of the friction as the cue ball passes, it tends to carry the 3 a little bit offline. That's why you have to overcut simple cut shots. There's a way of eliminating throw, however, and that is by using a little outside English. We use that with this ghost ball. If this ball is spinning in this direction at the moment of contact, it rolls off the object ball. It doesn't rub against it. That eliminates the tendency for the cue ball to throw this offline. And that's why good players, sometimes unconsciously, a lot of them don't know that throw affects simple cut shots. That's why a lot of them use outside English on cut shots. It enables them to hit the exact geometrical point opposite the target, and they don't have to think about throwing that offline. That's what you need to know about what happens to the object ball. What happens to the cue ball is this. It travels along the tangent line. Now, what is the tangent line? The tangent line is the perpendicular bisector of those 2 center points of the balls for you geometry buffs. In other words, at the moment of contact, draw a line in your mind through the centers of the balls and imagine a right angle line from that line in this direction. The cue ball travels along that tangent line if it doesn't have any spin. If it has backspin, it'll diverge this way. Top spin, it'll diverge that way. And if it's sliding at the moment of contact, it stays on that tangent line.
To eliminate the throw effect on cut shots, outside English or side spin can be used on the cue ball. At the moment of contact, the cue ball begins to travel along a line perpendicular to the line of centers between it and the object ball. This perpendicular line is called the tangent line. The following sections will explain how the various forms of English, as well as speed, can alter the cue ball's path along the tangent line.
What happens on a cut shot when the cue ball has neither topspin nor backspin? Stun action or stop action. What happens then? In a cut shot, you can't make the cue ball stop dead. It will drift along the tangent line after the contact. If it's sliding when it hits that object ball, it will stay along that tangent line depending on how hard you hit it. The harder you hit it, the further it goes. And every top player can estimate that distance with tremendous precision. And you can too if you practice. The thing to remember is that if you can slide the cue ball in, then you'll be staying on the tangent line. There's a nuance on stun shots at an angle, and that is the combination of stun or slide with side spin. Without side spin, the angle off the rail will be about like that. If you add side spin, you can change that rebound angle. In other words, the cue ball will be spinning in this direction if you use left as well as slide, so that when it hits that rail, it bounces off in a different direction. There'd be many cases where you might want to do that for position or to avoid interfering balls. Watch. Stop action at an angle or slide at an angle. The cue ball travels along the tangent line, and you have to be very good at judging the distance it travels. You can also combine stop action with side spin so that it changes the angle off the rail. It'll still travel along the tangent line, but when it hits the rail, the angle will be different. Now that's very useful if you have to get through a hole in interfering balls, or if you have to play a good position. Remember that. You can spin it along the tangent line also.
Three-time world champion Irving Craig. Oh, this is some run. This is some run.
Adding follow or topspin to the cue ball will force it to bend forward from the tangent line, like this, cutting the 13 in. After the cue ball leaves the object ball, it will travel along the tangent line, and topspin will make it bend forward. Now, speed affects the nature of that curve. A very soft shot will make it bend forward about like that. Medium speed goes a little bit along the tangent line before bending forward, and very hard speed goes even farther before topspin takes over and forces it to bend to the rail like that. It's very important to know that principle for position play, for avoiding scratches. Let's take a look at those curves on the table. If you use topspin on a cut shot, it causes the cue ball to bend forward from the tangent line. The harder you hit it, the longer it takes for the English or topspin to take effect and take over and bend it forward. Here's a soft speed. And this would be a hard speed. Let's see that again. In each case, the cue ball goes along the tangent line and bends forward. Now, what's the reason for knowing that? Well, it becomes very handy to know things like that when you're playing position or avoiding scratches or trying to break up a cluster. Here's a very nice example from a game position that even some good players would pass up. The game is 9-ball. I have to hit, this is the cue ball, remember. I have to hit the 3-ball, which is the lowest numbered ball on the table, first. But if I can make the 9 after hitting that, I'll win the game. A combination here is impossible. They're lined up incorrectly. But if I can cut the 3 this way and use high spin, the top spin will cause it to bend around that interfering ball and make the 9. Let's see if I can do that. No problem when you know how, and now you know how. As you might expect from the previous discussion, draw or backspin will cause the cue ball to diverge from the tangent line in the other direction. Look, we're cutting a 13 in. After hitting the 13, the cue ball will travel along the tangent line. Backspin will make it diverge in this direction. Speed, again, is very important. The harder you hit it, the further along the tangent line it tends to go before the backspin takes effect and bends it backwards. Watch. One final subtlety about stun shots, what the British call the stun run-through. Here's a long straight-in shot on the 14. To make the 8 as your final out shot, you'd have to stop the cue ball right in this vicinity, else you can't see the 8. One way of doing it would be to shoot fairly softly and just allow the cue ball to drift up here and stop. But shooting soft on a long straight-in shot like this in pool is risky because you might miss. The 14 might hit a bit of dirt or a crumb of chalk. The table might not be quite level, causing the 14 to drift offline. Most players would rather shoot this shot with authority to make sure they make it. And to make it follow through to this point, they would use stun run-through, which is mainly slide with just a little bit of follow. You hit it just a little bit above center so that it won't run away. It will stop in this area. It takes a lot of touch and a lot of practice, but if you can master it, you have another good weapon in your arsenal.
Adding topspin or follow to a cut shot will cause the cue ball to bend forward from the tangent line. The harder the cue ball is hit, the farther it will travel along the tangent line before it bends forward. On the other hand, draw on a cut shot will cause the cue ball to diverge from the tangent line in the opposite direction of a follow shot. Again, the distance the cue ball travels along the tangent line before bending increases with the speed of the shot. It is important to understand that stop or stun on a cut shot will not stop the cue ball dead. After striking the object ball, the cue ball simply travels straight along the tangent line. However, side spin can be used with stun action on a cut shot to change the angle at which the cue ball rebounds off the rail. Finally, the risk of shooting softly can be avoided by the use of stun run-through.
Now you have the knowledge, if not the experience, to put it all together. Remember, the key to the game is position play. It's not enough to make the ball. You've got to force the cue ball to go where you want it to go. Most players, in fact, spend far too much time when they're practicing and just pocketing balls. Much better to spend some of the time setting up easy shots and making that cue ball go to a fixed point on the table. That's how you build high runs. Here's a good practice method. Try it with a friend and see who can do it most consistently. Set up an easy shot. Here I've got the one ball, one diamond from the side, and the cue ball about a foot away from it. From this position, you should be able to get the cue ball in any spot on the table. Use a sheet of typing paper. Here I have a sheet of typing paper at the end of the table. There are many ways to get the cue ball from there to there. I'll show you three. One is stun. Stun straight over to the paper. Another one would be follow with spin down that way, and another one would be to draw straight back. Try it with a friend and see who can do it best. Here's an example of stun. Cut it slightly so it goes at a right angle down to the paper. Close enough. Now I'll show you one more example using follow. That's follow. And here's an example with draw, which is the most difficult. Just barely. Maybe you can do better with some practice. In playing position, it's often helpful to imagine the zone you're trying to get the cue ball into. It's often wedge-shaped. Look here. We're cutting the 14 in and trying to get position on the 8. Now, anywhere in this zone would be okay for position. You'd have a shot at the 8. But try not to cross the narrow neck of the zone. If you cut the 14 in and have any right-hand English, you're going to bring the cue ball down along this path, and you'll have to be very precise to stop the cue ball right along this line. Without English, you'll cross the wider part of the wedge and have much more freedom, a much greater margin of error. Sometimes this zone is huge, like this. Now you're cutting the 14 in. You can be anywhere from here to about here, a huge area, but yet you see players shooting too softly or too hard all the time because they haven't clearly got in their minds the size of that zone. It would be a major offense in a shot like this not to get into that zone. Here we have a cut shot in the side. We want to enter this position zone. It's better to enter over here where you have a lot of margin of freedom instead of down here where you'd have to stop precisely. So don't use any left-hand English to go down there. Keep it high on the table so you have a lot of margin of error. Sometimes that zone is very, very large, but if the player hasn't visualized it, you might miss it even so. It would be a felony to fail to get position on a shot like this with such a big margin of error, but you see it all the time. Another helpful concept in playing position is called line position. Let's say you have the 8 here. It's blocked by a couple of your opponent's balls. You have this shot. The wedge you're trying to get into now is fairly narrow. Anywhere in there is fine for a shot at the 8. If you use straight follow, pocket the 4, come out along here, again you need quite a bit of precision. But if you use a little low English and a little right, bring the cue ball over this way, you're now approaching the line of the shot, and you have a very large margin of error. That's a useful concept that comes up now and then. It's one you should remember. That's a pretty small margin of error, but coming over here brings us in along the line of the position. Getting an angle. That's often the key to running the table. And by that I mean getting the correct angle on the second shot. It's not enough just to make a ball and get into a position where you can make the next ball. You have to get the right angle on the second ball so you can proceed to, say, a third ball. You're playing position at least 2 shots ahead. It's not as hard as it sounds. It's just a matter of thinking about it and being aware of the process. Take this position. 3 balls in a row. They're each about a half an inch from the rail. The cue ball is between them. The problem is to make both those balls and get position on the 8 at the other end of the table. Could you do it? Try it. Set it up 5 times and see how many times you can get out from that position. Make all 3 balls. A top player would analyze that problem instantly and get out almost every time. Not because he has more skill than you, but he might know a little bit more about how to handle a position. The key is getting an angle on the second ball. In other words, make the 9, and either by stunning it out like this or by following through to here, leave yourself a sharp angle on the second ball. If you have to get the cue ball one end of the table to the other, straight in is death, but an angle makes it easy for you to cut that in and get down to position on the 8. Here's a position with 3 balls along the end of the rail, all the same distance from the rail, the cue ball in the center. We want to make the 2 balls and get position on a ball way down at the other end of the table. The secret is an angle on the second ball. You can either stun out to here or follow out to there. Anything to give you an angle. You're dead if you're straight in on a ball when you have to get to the other end of the table. Now I can easily make the 9 and get position on the 8. Here's another example. The same problem. Make both balls, get position on the 8. If you play the 14 first and leave the cue ball in here, you've got a severe problem because you have to go off the right side of the 9 to make it. That sends the cue ball in this direction. It might be possible to come around like this, but it would be very difficult, and there might be interfering balls. However, if you make the 14 and draw back, not just so you can make it easily, but so you have an angle on the ball. Now it's easy to cut it in and come down in this position. Most beginners wouldn't think of using draw to get the correct angle on the second ball, but that's the key here. Now you know the key. And if I ever see you in a pool hall mishandling a position like this after watching this tape, I'm going to be deeply offended. If you make the 14 and stop right here, you have no position. You might be able to go off the 9 this way, but you're running into possible disaster, and there may be interfering balls there. Here's a chance where you could use draw to get an angle on the 9 ball. Then you'd have an easy time getting down for the 8.
When setting up a shot for position, try to visualize the entire zone in which it is acceptable for the cue ball to come to rest. As a rule, it's best to aim for that part of the zone where your margin for error is widest. Sometimes, the most critical factor in playing for position is the line within the zone on which the cue ball must come to rest. Visualizing this line in advance will make your shot easier. In the same way, looking ahead to get the angle you'll need on the next shot and the next shot is an important step in improving your game. Remember, planning your position 2 or 3 shots in advance is the key to playing great pool. It's not as difficult as it seems. It simply requires a little forethought and putting to use the skills you've already learned.
You're going to love this section because I'm going to reveal a closely guarded secret, even if it costs me my thumbs. It has to do with making a ball stay on the rail and into the pocket. Now, most books of instruction, and even many teachers, will tell you that in order to make a ball that's frozen to the rail, you should hit the rail and the ball at the same time. False. If you do that, the friction between the cue ball and the 15 will throw it into the rail and out. Now, of course, in a simple position like this, you could easily make it by hitting the rail and ball at the same time because the margin of error is so great. There might also be a groove along the rail that holds the ball to the rail. However, in a more severe position like this, where you have to make the 15 ball stay on the rail and go past the side pocket all the way to the far corner, there you have a very small margin of error, and your precision has to be great. Plus, you have to know a little something, which I'll tell you. But first, I want to show you an old hustler's trick. This stunt is as old as the hills, but people still fall for it. You have two balls frozen together and frozen to the rail. The challenge is, can you hit the one and make the two from this position? The one ball is contacting the two directly opposite the corner pocket, so you might think it should go in. But if you've been paying attention, you'll know that the one will throw the two toward the rail and it will diverge. If you walk innocently into a pool hall and are challenged on this, you shouldn't lose any money knowing that. Now watch how the two will diverge from the rail. Missed a mile. The hustler, though, when he sets the balls up, he'll bet you that he can make it. And he'll take your money over and over. The position is the same, everything is frozen, and when he shoots it, it goes right in. Well, why is it that when he shoots it, it goes in, and when you shoot it, it misses? The answer is, if you're watching carefully, you'll notice that I moistened my fingertip. Touch the contact point. That eliminates the friction between the two balls and keeps the two on the rail. I've done that over and over for people. When I shoot it, it goes in. When they shoot it, it doesn't go in. Of course, I didn't take their money. Let's look at this very similar position. Now we have a little space between the balls. About the space of thickness of 1 or 2 credit cards. Now what will happen if I shoot the one ball? You can ask a good player. A lot of them won't have any idea. What happens is the two will go in. That proves a very important point about shots along the rail. What it proves is you must hit the rail slightly first, slightly ahead of the object ball. Now, as we've just seen, striking the one in that position will keep the two on the rail. That's where the cue ball should be, right where the one is, to make that shot. So that the cue ball will come right in here, hit the rail first, and then the two. What happens really is that the cue ball will be pressed into the rail at the moment of contact. Now we're aiming away from the corner pocket, and the friction will throw the two along the rail. I think the best technique is to first try to hit the rail and the ball at the same time, the way the instruction books and most teachers say. But then start shading the aim a little bit toward the rail so that you hit the rail first. If you'll do that, you'll find that your consistency on this shot will increase tremendously. Before I knew that, I had a hard time making that shot half the time. Now I can make it 8 or 9 out of 10, and so can you.
When an object ball is frozen to the rail, remember that friction between the cue ball and the object ball tends to push the object ball into the rail, thus throwing it offline. To compensate, aim the cue ball to strike the rail just slightly ahead of the object ball.
A carom is making the cue ball go from ball to ball, also called a billiard. But the idea is not just used in the game of billiards, it's also a powerful weapon in the game of pool. Take a look at this position in 9-ball. In 9-ball, you must hit the lowest numbered ball on the table first, but whoever makes the 9-ball wins the game. Here, the 2 is blocked. You can't make it anywhere, but the 9 is hanging on the lip. If you could hit the 2, carom the cue ball over to the 9 and pocket it, you win the money. There's an easy way to calculate that position. Imagine a line from the 9-ball past the 2 so that the line passes through the center of where the cue ball would be at the moment of contact. The old tangent line again. If you can hit that point with the cue ball and have the cue ball sliding with no topspin or no backspin, it will travel along the tangent line perfectly and make the 9. Pretty easy when you know how. Other examples might be like this. Hit the 2 ball into the 3 so that it touches that point, the tangent point. Then the 2 will travel over and hit the 9. It's also possible when these are frozen. If the perpendicular bisector, the line of centers, travels along in this direction, the 2 goes over and pockets the 9. You hit the 2 travels over and makes the 9. However, remember that the fuller you hit this, the more tendency there is for the 2 to push forward off the tangent line. Remember that and try it a few times and you'll see what I mean. A final subtlety. Let's say we want to carom the 2 ball off the 3 and into the pocket. You estimate the tangent line, you find the contact point, you drive the 2 into that contact point. Everything is fine, but there is a pitfall. If you shoot too softly, the 2 ball will pick up some topspin, and as it travels along the tangent line, it might bend forward and you'll miss. On shots like this, shoot firmly so that the 2 is sliding into the 3. Then it'll stay on that tangent line as you expected. That's just one little nuance I've learned from my technical consultant, Mr. Bob Jewett.
Carom shots can be an important tool in the game of pool. Remember what you've learned about controlling the cue ball along the tangent line, and carom shots will soon be a successful part of your arsenal.
He's going to jump the 8 ball. He's going to jump over the side of the 8 ball. Attempt to make the 7 in the corner. Perfect, perfect. Couldn't have hit it any better.
Now let's talk about pool magic. In the last 10 years or so, the jump shot has emerged as a major weapon for tournament players. It's possible by raising the butt of your cue to a 20 to 40 degree angle with the cloth to jump the cue ball all the way over an interfering ball and make another one. But that's pretty risky. You run the risk of sending the cue ball off the table and through the door and down the stairs and out into the street. In most games, the practical application is to just clear the edge of an interfering ball. That way you don't have to send the cue ball too high above the table. Let's look at an example. Here's the 9 ball in the side, but the edge of the 7 is interfering. You can't quite get past the 7 and make the 9. What to do? You could try some sort of curve shot or a jump shot. In shooting a jump shot, you elevate the cue 20 to 40 degrees from the horizontal, depending on how high you want it to jump. Also, the height of the jump depends on how hard you hit the ball, so this takes quite a bit of practice. Now, you can use backspin on a jump shot. Hit it below center like that, it will still have backspin when it lands on the other side of the interference. A little bit safer is right through the middle, but beware of hitting it above center because you'll trap the cue ball under the tip. In this case, I have to use a little bit of draw so I don't follow the 9 right into the pocket.
It's a 3-point play if he hits it.
Good shot, good shot.
To execute a jump shot, raise the butt of the cue 20 to 40 degrees from the horizontal and strike the cue ball in the center. For backspin, strike below center. Striking above center will result in a miscue. The height of the jump shot depends on the angle at which the cue strikes the cue ball and how hard it is hit.
She did it. What a shot. What a shot.
There's nothing like a good massé shot to really bring an audience to its feet. The player shoots almost straight down on the cue ball from above, giving it tremendous spin. The cue ball takes off in a certain direction, it slows down, it might even stop, then change direction entirely. There's just nothing like it. It's always been the best shot in billiards for entertainment purposes. And now, for the first time, I'm going to strip away the mystery of the massé shot and bring it within the reach of every schoolgirl. It's still a tough shot, but I can tell you a few things that will make it a lot simpler for you to master it. I'll use these big balls because there's some geometry that shows up better with them. Here's an example of where you might want to use a massé shot in a game of 8-ball. The 8-ball is in the jaws, but there's a ball blocking the cue ball's path. You can make this shot with the massé. The cue ball will take off in this direction, turn left, and knock the 8-ball in. Now here's how you analyze it. Imagine the point on a cloth on which the cue ball is resting. Think of this line that you want the cue ball to eventually take. Since you want it to turn left, you move over to the left side of the cue ball and find an aiming point on the cloth so that that point and the resting point form a line that is parallel to this line. Now for the aim. Here's the line you want the cue ball to travel on initially. So imagine an aiming line that passes through the point on the cloth you're going to aim at. Hold your cue in that line and then raise it vertically, always keeping it in a vertical plane passing through the aiming line until you're almost shooting straight down on the cue ball. Now, how far along this line will the cue ball travel before it bends? That's a function of the friction of the cloth, how steeply you've elevated the cue, and how hard you shoot the cue ball. So you see there's a lot for you to learn just by experience and by practice. But the delicious secret is that this line is parallel to that line. And that was first talked about, and hardly ever since, in 1835 when the great French mathematician Gustave Coriolis wrote his masterwork. Here's the point the cue ball is resting on. There's the imaginary aiming point that forms a line parallel to the final direction. And here is the aiming line. Now, most players make the mistake of shooting massé shots too hard. They don't have to be shot hard. Put your cue horizontal on the aiming line, raise it, keep it in a vertical plane, find that imaginary point, and strike softly.
To execute a massé shot, visualize a line between the resting point of the cue ball and an imaginary aiming point under the cue ball on the cloth. This line must be parallel to the cue ball's final direction when it strikes the object ball. Aim the cue horizontally in the direction the cue ball must travel before it turns. Then raise the butt of the cue, keeping it in the same vertical plane until you're shooting almost straight down. Aim at the imaginary aiming point on the cloth and strike the cue ball only as hard as necessary.
The curve shot is a much more practical shot than the massé shot. You don't have to do quite so much, and you can do it with a lot more security. Let's say you have a shot where the object ball is hanging on the lip, but you can't quite shoot at it because there's an interfering ball. Perhaps the interfering ball is too close to permit a jump shot. Maybe there's too many other balls on the table for a bank shot. In certain situations, a curve shot is duck soup. Fortunately, you can figure it out by using the same geometry that you do on a massé shot. Watch this. Here's the problem. An easy 8 in a corner. If you could just see it, the 1 is in the way. That shot can be made by curving the cue ball around the 1. Again, the massé geometry. Here's the line I want the cue ball to assume. So I pick a spot ahead of the cue ball so that a line connecting that spot with the cue ball forms a line parallel to the line I want the cue ball to assume. You have to shoot over here to miss the 1. You shoot on the right because you want it to curve to the right, and then you find that imaginary point. Not so tough if you know how.
Curve shots obey the same laws of geometry as the massé shot. To make the cue ball curve to the right, strike the cue ball to the right of center. To aim, pick a point beyond the cue ball and imagine a line between that point and the resting point of the cue ball. This line must be parallel to the line the cue ball must finally follow to correctly strike the object ball. Elevate the butt of the cue approximately 20 to 30 degrees and stroke.
I wish we had more time, but the game is infinite and the tape is finite. But I hope I've at least convinced you that it's a game of infinite riches with many layers of depth and subtlety, enough to challenge the naturally gifted like you and the analytical like me. Now, if you want to reach the highest plateau of pool proficiency, it's simple. You have to practice. You have to study those 2 tapes. You have to read a couple of books. You have to play with people better than you are. I hope you do become a good player, but I've done all I can. See you later. I'm out of here.